Okay, so everybody, this is Dr. Cassandra Olds. She's assistant professor at Kansas State. Um, she does an immense amount of work in veterinary entomology and tick work and fly work. And I watched the presentation at the Entomological Society, and I thought it was very interesting on her take on thresholds. So we're going to get a little bit of all that today, I would guess. So welcome and
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to mesh two things together. And, initially they don't necessarily look like they go together, but I actually think they do. So really excited to chat to you. I mean, economic thresholds and new approaches to fly worry is kind of my soapbox. So I enjoy any time I get to talk about it. So really to get us started, we talk about limits and thresholds. So the economic injury level is the lowest number of flies or ticks or lice that an animal has that would cause damage equal to the cost of control. And theoretically, it's the break-even point. So if lice were going to cost me $10 and my poron cost me $10, that's your economic injury level, and you're at a break even. And so I always like to think of this as a gas tank, right? And the number of pests. Once you hit that level, you're at empty. And so we shouldn't be waiting to run out of gas before we refill our tank. And so the economic threshold is a slightly lower number where you would intervene to prevent the insect populations getting to those injury levels. And honestly, it works great in systems where you have, for example, a monocrop, right? Where you have this exact strain of maize and you plant it and you can predict how much it's going to grow. Everybody's the same. You can say that, if I have 5 insects per acre, all of a sudden it's worth it. And so in the veterinary entomology field, we really have tried to capture this data, but it's actually really difficult. And the push for it is always because, well, when should I intervene? And as we're learning more and more, we're realizing that this isn't necessarily a static situation. So how we've tried to address this as sort of veterinary entomologists is we've taken try to correlate the number of insects on an animal with a production output. So for stable flies, we'll take lots of pictures of animals' legs because stable flies like to be on animal legs. On horn flies, they like to be on the back and the belly, so we'll take pictures of the whole animal. And then what we do is we, manually count these flies, which is very, very time consuming. And then we say, okay, animal 510 had, thousands of flies. What was its weight gains like? And so then we sort of determine a number of insects that are associated with increased or decreased gains. And so what is the magic number, right? If you're looking at lice, this can be 10 lice per square inch. If you're looking at stable flies, this can be between 10 and 15 stable flies per animal. And if you're looking at horn flies, this can be between 200 to 300 per animal. However, what is the cumulative impact? When we do these studies, we control and we look at the impact of lice or the impact of stable flies or the impact of horn flies. Very rarely do we put these numbers together and say, what is the overall impact of ectoparasitism? And this is what we really need to be doing because this is the environment that the animals are in. And then there's also the economic impact of all the other things that we just don't know, right? We don't know necessarily what the threshold and injury limits are for things like cattle grubs, which have been largely eradicated, but we still have them in Kansas. We've got face flies, we've got tabanids. And so we have this really complex environment that the animal is in. And we don't take into account breed. We don't take into account how this may change over age of the animal. And we definitely don't take into account what is the economic impact of the external parasitism and the pathogens which are transmitted. And so what we have is we have this really, really dynamic situation where it's really hard to put a fixed number on it to get what is my economic impact. And even if we did, right, even if we were able to quantify the exact number, in my personal opinion, I think even if we get another number, it's just kicking the can down the road, because there's so much variation. So on the left, there is an animal that has 71 flies on it, and on the right, we have 1,180 flies, right? So if we say that you need to treat if your horn fly economic injury level is 300 flies per animal, our back animal hasn't crossed that, but our front animal has. And, you know, we know from experience that, you know, you don't treat an animal, you treat the herd. So do we wait to treat when everybody's crossed that economic threshold, or do we treat when the first animals cross that threshold? And then on the right, we have a study that we did. None of these animals had insecticide control. And in blue, you've got the sort of the mean for the 508 animals and the standard deviation. And as you can see, it's huge, right? Then I've got 3 animals where we had individual fly counts over time, because we randomly picked a certain proportion out of each pen. So we had, you know, a couple of animals where we had repeat measures. And even an individual animal with no insecticide treatment will go above this injury level and below, and then above and then below. And so, you know, realistically, if we keep thinking about measuring economic impact in terms of numbers of flies, it really is not something that is useful to the producer. However accurate it may be in an academic setting, it is just not feasible for a producer to do. And one of the biggest limitations of any of these studies is that they tend to be really system specific, right? So you'll do a study of the impact of an insect in dairy cows, or in beef cows, or in feedlots. And it's really hard to get sort of a general recommendation that you can give a producer, irrespective of whether it's a dairy or a feedlot. And so I think that we need to get away from this notion of the number of flies being something that we need to be so fixated on. And so kind of going down this path and doing some other things, I just recently this spring kind of did a very informal poll of producers when I was giving them a talk about Asian longhorn tick, and just kind of get an idea of where we are at. And 88 to 93% of these producers didn't know how much money they lost to flies. And this is not unsurprising, right? If we can't even figure it out in an academic setting, how is a producer supposed to know dollars and cents, how much money do I lose to flies? And the problem with this is that if an individual doesn't know how much money they're losing, how can they possibly deploy an insecticide and know whether it is profitable or not? Because we can always increase gains. We can do a lot of things which increase cattle gains or milk yield or whatever your outcome is. But if you had to invest more resources than that improvement is worth, then we're losing money. And if we don't know how much money we're losing initially to the flies, we cannot possibly know whether our intervention methods are profitable. And this sort of statistic was not surprising to me at all, right? Only 6 to 7% of the producers we polled use fly counts to make treatment decisions. And those that do, it's generally kind of an estimate, right? There seems like there's a lot of flies on a lot of animals. So if we're basing every single thing that we do on the number of flies on an animal, and it's a factor that producers aren't even using, even if we invest a lot of money in redefining what our injury limits are, if we still use the same metric, it's going to be no more useful than the current numbers that we have. And so this really got me thinking about the fact that the whole system in itself is kind of a little bit broken, and how can we fix this? And so I was out at some feedlots here in Western Kansas, and I noticed that on their perimeter pens, and so these are pens that are close to vegetation, which is a prime stable fly resting habitat and breeding habitat too, I noticed that all these cattle were pushed and bunched together. And on the right, you see a drone image that we took where you can really see how extreme this sort of bunching behavior is. And so I asked them, hey, is this normal? And they said, yep, it happens every single summer. And as an entomologist, I got kind of excited about that and had to reel it in because this, I know, is costing them money. And I said, well, does it go away in winter? And they said, yep, all those pens go back to normal in winter, which gave me a strong suspicion that this is a fly issue. And it's to the point where we have some areas in some of these facilities where when they close out in summer, which means that the cattle are sent off to market, they don't refill some of those pens because the fly pressure is so bad that it's just not economically worthwhile. So we really are, these flies are throttling not only the profits, but also the way that these feedlots operate. And so last year, we went to 4 different facilities and we sort of try to quantify this, right? Can we use this animal behavior, which is very, very clear, and the producers already know that it happens? Can we use this to kind of measure what flies are costing us? And so I tortured a graduate student, and I made him go to these feedlots every single month, and we basically flew a drone over these high fly pressure pens, which we are on the perimeter of the facility. And then we had our control, which were on the inside of the facility. And in red, you can see this is the proportion of the total population in each pen block. So we took a still shot of each pen and we divided it into 9, with 1, 2, and 3 being on the feed bunk, 5, 6, and 7, 4, 5, and 6 in the middle, and then 7, 8, and 9 on the opposite end away from the feed bunk. And so what we noticed is that, kind of lining up with those observations that the feedlots had, is that the cattle were pushing away from the stable fly habitat. And alarmingly, in this case, it's actually pushing it off the feed bunk. So animals are moving towards the back of the pen and spending a large proportion of their time in the back of the pen. What that means is that they're not eating and they're not drinking. We also saw a significantly higher percentage that were standing instead of laying down and ruminating. And so A is 1 month and B is a separate month. So this held through over all our summer months. And what's really exciting is we just got done doing the winter data, and winter, all the pens look the same. And so that's sort of that anecdotal evidence that we got that this is a summer phenomenon really, really did hold true. And so we do see increased cattle bunching in these perimeter pens. And this is important because previous studies have shown that only 25% of the money we're losing is actually through the fly impact. So we're talking about blood loss, stamping, tail swishing, etc. The rest of it comes from this cattle bunching behavior, and mainly the fact that they actually get heat stress. Cattle are very, very poor thermal regulators. They're big, they've got these rumination stomachs that produce a whole lot of energy and heat, and they need to be able to dissipate that, especially when we come to climates that are hot or humid. So if you're all bunching together, you don't get the airflow that you need to dissipate that heat. So you actually lose a lot of money from this reduced feed efficiency because they just can't shed that heat. And so this is really, really important for animals in confined conditions. They can't go find a tree. They can't go stand in a pond. So in many cases, there is not shade provided, right? So they are just at the mercy of the flies, and then they bunch together, and I call it the penguin effect, So how penguins will kind of huddle together, and the ones on the inside are nice and warm, but the ones on the outside get the brunt of the cold. The same thing here happens with the cattle, right? The cattle on the inside are protected from the stable flies, and the cattle on the outside of that bunch are being targeted. And you can actually watch them. It's really, really interesting watching them, because, you know, when an animal kind of braves and leaves the group to go and get a drink or get food, and to the point where I've seen them sort of, you can actually watch them sort of start to leave the bunch. And it looks like they're thinking about this. They know that they're going to get bitten, and they really are evaluating whether or not they're hungry enough to go and get bitten. And then those brave souls who go out and try and get a drink of water or some food, when they go back to that bunch, they will actually bully their way in, trying to get to the middle. And so what's not accounted for in this calculation is, when animals are doing this, how much are we losing, not just from feed efficiency, but in terms of increased aggression, increased injury. We see a lot of these things that may be correlated with this fly worry. And the production losses are really significant, right? We looked and we lost 0.202 on feed efficiency, and we calculated that for one of the feedlots where we were working at, and we lost $70 a head on each of those outside pens. And the pens that we worked with, we had 4 age matched on the inside and outside. Each pen lost over $12,000. And so when you're looking at a large feedlot or even a medium-sized feedlot, those numbers then go from $70 a head to between $800,000 and $1 million just from flies alone. And so now we're like, okay, well, if we have a way that we can quantify, okay, we're losing way more money than we thought. Now, all of a sudden, if we want to say, okay, well, let's look at developing new methods to control these flies, whether it be moving the animals, whether it be designing traps, whether it be being more efficient when we target with our insecticides, we now have a number we can work with to really decide what we need to do to mitigate these losses. And the really exciting thing for me about using this animal behavior approach is that we see it across all production settings, right? So this first video is some stockers that we have here in Kansas, and these animals did not come to the fence because I called them to the fence. I found them on the fence, and this is a very, very common phenomenon. Well, basically, they'll march through the pasture and then bunch up against the fence line. You can see everybody's agitated. They're grouped together. We've got a lot of stamping, a lot of swishing. But for me, what's most important here is these animals are not grazing. There's beautiful grass around them. They're not eating. These are stockers. Stockers need to put on as much weight as possible in a very short period of time. And so any time that we're spending not eating and bunching together is a significant loss. Now, this image, this is really early in the season, and this is primarily a stable fly-driven bunching, but we'll see this later in the year with horn flies. The next video is a group of cows who are bunched together in a pond. And so producers often say, oh, it's because they're hot, and they very well may be hot. But the worry that we see is a lot of head swishing, a lot of ear flicking. A stable fly can't bite your legs if you're in water, right? So again, we've got these animals are bothered by the flies, and they're bunching together. And what for me was worrying about this clip as I watched this little small cow herd here is that these were cows who had calves. And these poor little babies were kind of in the grass being left alone. One of the babies thought, well, maybe I should join my mom, and realized that this was too deep, right? So we start to get into really, really difficult situations with this sort of bunching behavior. And so really what we're trying to do now here at K-State is trying to develop a way where we can correlate animal behavior with production outcomes, whether this is feed efficiency, weight gain, or milk yield. And then also we need to integrate new technologies with our integrated pest management strategies. we need to start leveraging the things that are being done in other areas. There's really great smart technologies that are you know, sort of we're getting invisible fencing, we're getting tags that cattle can wear to determine where they are on their pasture. Well, if these tags talk to each other, we can also get them to tell us, hey, hang on, you know, these animals have spent a large amount of their day too close to each other. You probably have high levels of fly worry, and this is probably the time that we need to intervene. And so using the animal behavior rather than the individual number of flies to determine our intervention points, and hopefully get a better idea on how can an individual producer quantify their individual loss. And really what it does boil down to is extension and education. And we see this throughout. We can come up with the greatest scientific advances, but if they do not reach the producer, then there is no point that we ever made them, right? Because our goal is to carry out research that is going to benefit the producer. And in the same way, if we don't have those extension and education networks, then we have no way for the producer to tell us what their problems were, right? This whole study, which we're now, because of the great preliminary data, we're putting in a big proposal to get additional funding for this. None of this would have happened if me as an extension personnel wasn't at a feedlot to go and see what their fly conditions were like and trying to help them develop an integrated pest management program. So we need to have this, it's a two-way street, and we need to, I think that the more stuff that we do, that we can show this kind of impact where we do help producers out, will hopefully result in this field of entomology getting a little bit more attention. And so what we've kind of developed is sort of how do we integrate tick and fly control, and this is something that we need to start thinking about. We often say, okay, what tags do I need for fly control? What do I need to apply for tick control? But we really need to be thinking about the whole parasitism environment that an animal is in. And the fact that this will vary significantly depending if it's a beef cow on pasture or a dairy in an enclosed barn. Right? The insect pressures that you get are going to differ. And this is why extension is so important, right? Because we can make a fact sheet and we can put it on the internet, but really what we need is that extension capacity to work with individual producers and say, hey, you are a dairy. You have this many cows, you're in this part of the world, these are your insect issues, let's develop a pest management plan. And then furthermore, let's follow up after the fly season, let's follow up after tick season. Did it work out for you? And so not all options are available in all locations or for all people. And I always really stress this whenever I give sort of the standard tick control seminar, because producers aren't going to be able to adopt every single one of these control methods. And so it's about picking the things that work for you and making them as impactful as possible. And really, we are in challenging times. The Asian longhorn tick and Theileria orientalis has been running rampant across a lot of the United States. As we look forward with the potential New World screwworm invasion, we really have to think more strategically about what we're recommending for fly and tick control, because some of these products are the only options that we will have if New World screwworm does become an issue on US soil. And then where do we sit? So we really need to be a little bit more proactive about how we think about our parasite control. And so this just really highlights to me the fluidity of situations, right? So in red are states that had Asian longhorn tick infestations by 2024. I gave talks multiple times over 2025, and I had to keep updating this map because each time I would give the talk, a new state would be infested, right? So Kansas, we just got our infestation in our first confirmed one in 2025. And what for me has been really, really interesting is that it was one larval tick that was found on a dog with no history of travel. And that to me establishes that, well, we've got populations. I was just surprised that we hadn't heard anything before this, right? But as in 2026, as I'm giving these talks and saying, hey, this is what it looks like, I've had producers come up to me and say, you know, this heavy infestation you mentioned, I think we had that, right? I was at this location and we were moving fence posts and there were just a whole lot of these brown ticks and I didn't think anything of it at the time. So, you know, populations go unnoticed until they reach infestation levels. And at least for Asian longhorn tick, those infestation levels can be astronomically high, higher than you will ever see with our native tick species. And so I always tell producers, if you see astronomic tick burdens above normal and it's a regular brown tick, you have to reach out, because this is normally an indication that there is a, just not that the tick is present, but it's reached an infestation level. And why we really worry about this is that with Theileria orientalis being present, if a producer does not know that they have a high infestation on a pasture and they put cattle onto that pasture that have never seen Theileria orientalis, you can have really significant mortality rates. For the United States, we're anywhere between 20 and 50% mortality rates in classical outbreak situations. So it's a good, you know, if you see something, say something. If anybody sees these really, really heavy infestations, reach out to your people. If anybody wants to contact me, my contact information is at the back in case you just want some more information on that. You will also see astronomically high infestation levels on the animals. And so whenever you see that, it's a note that something is not quite right. And so when we talk about tick control, there's really two intervention points. You can control the ticks on the pasture, you can control the ticks on the animal. And so here in the Flint Hills, we burn. Not everywhere allows burning. We're fortunate in that the Flint Hills, it's a tall grass prairie. It has evolved under fire, and most of our producers burn. However, this is not available in every location. And honestly, even if it is available in your location, don't burn your pastures if you've never burnt a pasture. This is not something that you need to be doing if you are not experienced at handling the fire, because trying to kill your ticks might end up burning down your house. So this is something that needs to be done by people who are experienced. Those where we have done it, we have shown that burning significantly reduces your tick population. And so in the Flint Hills, at least, there's three main times that we burn, either in spring, which is sort of April time. And then after the grazing period, we can also burn in sort of late summer and fall. And irrespective of when you burnt, burning was very, very effective in killing ticks. We did find that spring burning was more effective, and we think this is because when you can get those ticks before they've come out of their overwintering period, you kill a higher proportion. If you're waiting and you're doing it in the summer or late fall, then some of those ticks are still on animals. Now, this is for Kansas. This will really depend on what your wet season is. The take home is that you need to burn when your grass can carry a fire. We also learned from this study that you only basically get one season of protection after your burn. And so the red and the green are two different pastures. We burned both of them in April of 2023 and measured the ticks throughout that grazing period, and ticks stayed fairly low. And then in 2024, we only burnt the second site, and site one we didn't burn. And you can kind of see that the tick numbers were increasing sort of as we got into early 2024. But then those rapidly decreased after we applied the fire. And so where we didn't burn, we didn't have that effect. We also found that spring burning reduced our hornfly burdens. And what for me interesting about this is, so when we burnt in the spring, which is here in green, our hornfly numbers were lower overall for most of the season compared to the cattle that were on a summer or fall burnt pastures. Now, if you run statistics on this, it's insignificant 90% of the time. However, when we looked at the weight gains, we saw that those the spring burn grazed stockers had a significantly higher weight gain. And the pasture conditions are equal across all treatments. It's not that forage is somehow better in the spring burn group. But we calculated that we probably had a 25, almost $26 increase in sale weight for those cattle that were grazed on spring burnt pastures. And so we also need to get away from this idea that you need to remove the flies completely. Sometimes just knocking back the flies a little bit can significantly improve your profits. I really wish that we had sensors in these cattle, or that we had thought about it at the time to monitor what the behavior of these animals was. So really burning, if you do intend to burn, make sure you know what your goal is. If your goal is to reduce ticks and flies, the best time of the year to do it will be in spring. You want to pay close attention to the weather though, because you want to burn before the insects come out of their overwintering period. And then making sure you get a good burn. What we do find is that any areas that remain unburnt, the ticks especially aren't killed in those areas, but then also when you put cattle onto that pasture, they automatically go for the green area. So they almost take themselves to the prime tick habitat. So really, only if this is allowable in your location and you are a fairly seasoned professional with burning do I recommend that this is an option for producers. One thing that everybody can do is clear brush and hedge areas. Here in the Great Plains, we have seen a huge issue with woody encroachment, especially with eastern red cedars. Honestly, if I ever want to find a tick, I go straight to the eastern red cedars and I look there, because they really are these sort of hot spots. An insect's greatest problem in life is going to be drying out. So they tend to survive in areas where we have high humidity. So this is around trees, especially our cedar trees, around waterways. And so if you can either clear those areas or limit access to those areas, you can just kind of minimize that interaction between the animal and the ticks. Keeping grass short, especially for ticks, definitely does help, because as the grass is short, you expose it to hot conditions or cold conditions, which are basically any extreme which the tick can't survive. And so you have them drying out and dying from that. So this is not, obviously, as everything else we talk about, not everybody's going to be able to burn, not everybody's going to be able to clear their brush, not everybody is going to be able to mow. So these are just some of the tools that are available. One of the things that is available, if you can afford to just not put cattle on that land, and we especially when we see hyper infestations of the Asian longhorn tick. So we have 3 pastures here. This one that is on the right, that is a pasture where we had a pretty severe Asian longhorn tick infestation. On the bottom left, you have a pasture that is grazed by cattle, but it has no trees. It's fairly open. And then at the back left, you have a very thick woody area that isn't grazed, but does have, the occasional white-tailed deer and the bunnies and squirrels and things like that going through. And what we found was that on the pasture that had no cattle and no trees, we had almost 0 ticks. On the back pasture where we had the wooded area, we had a couple of Asian longhorn ticks, but we really had an equal distribution between our Asian longhorn ticks and our native tick species. And tick numbers were fairly low. On the right, we had cattle grazing at a fairly high densities, and we had over 95% of the ticks we collected were Asian longhorn ticks, and we had astronomically high numbers of those ticks. And it makes sense, right? Because a tick will lay as many eggs as the blood meal she takes in. So if she gets a really good blood meal, she'll lay a lot of eggs. And for the Asian longhorn tick in particular, every single tick is a female. So every tick is capable of laying a large number of eggs. So this is why we get those hyper infestations. So if none of those female ticks have to compete and everybody's finding a host and getting a great blood meal, she's going to lay a whole lot of eggs. In the wooded area, you know, those ticks that are there have to hope that maybe a bunny crosses their path. So if you can remove cattle from the pasture for at least 1 year, nature will take its course and kind of get those populations back under control a little bit. The one thing not to do is spray your pastures. And unfortunately, this is the first thing that everybody wants to do. They find an insect, they want to get rid of it, they just want to throw insecticide at it. And the reason for this is on the picture on the right, you have an Asian longhorn tick here, and you see it circled in red. It's at the top of this blade of grass. This is what, you know, it's hanging out there. It's waiting to smell the carbon dioxide from some cattle, and then it will hop onto whoever brushes past it. Most of our ticks, it was still fairly chilly that morning. They are underneath here, right below my hand, in the leaf litter, in the underside. And so when you're spraying a pasture, all you're really contacting are these top areas, and you're not actually impacting the areas below it. When we had the big outbreak in Iowa, I chatted with one of the places that had it, and he said, well, I need to get the ticks off this pasture. And he wanted to spray it. And I said, well, I don't think it's going to work. But if you do, try and mow first so that you're at least getting the most access as possible. So he mowed the pasture and he sprayed. And a couple months later, I said, so how did that spraying work? And he said it didn't work at all. And so this spring, he gave me a call and he said, hey, is now a good time to burn? And so he's going to burn, and he's going to see how that works out for him. The other thing with spraying is that it will impact any insects in the area. And you know, for healthy grasslands, we need pollinators. And if we're spraying to try and get rid of ticks, we're probably killing those pollinators. When we're talking about on-animal tick control, I like to integrate fly and tick control together because we don't want to be exposing our flies to multiple insecticide groups in a single year. And so if you're using an organophosphate ear tag, for example, then you don't want to pair that with a pyrethroid spray. In our survey, shockingly, about a third of producers follow insecticide rotation. And honestly, this isn't on them. You know, it's really hard to set up an insecticide rotation strategy. And if nobody's there to help you through it, it can be really, really difficult. Only half of the producers check the insecticide method of action. So we do really have a long way to go in helping producers to set up their insect control programs. Ear tags are very effective for horn flies. We recommend that you tag both ears because the insecticide has to move from the tag onto the body, and that's through contact. So if you're only tagging one ear, only half of the animal gets coverage. You realistically are only getting about 90 to 100 days of coverage, and we do recommend that you take the ear tag out after that, because we want to limit the exposure that the flies have to sublethal doses of insecticides. And I just realized there's a typo here. It's supposed to be delay tagging if possible, not if horrible. But you know, we often see, at least here in our part of the world, that they'll tag the cattle as the cattle go back out onto pasture, which means that 100 days gets used up when we have relatively few flies. So waiting to tag, if possible, is recommended. Ear tags for tick control is only effective if you have a Gulf Coast tick, a spinosauce ear tick, or if you're like this bull on the right, where you actually have Asian longhorn ticks in the ear. Other than that, it is not effective for tick control. We do recommend a 3-year rotation for ear tags. There's 2 options. You can use organophosphate for 2 years and then a pyrethroid for the 3rd year. If you have a fairly susceptible organophosphate fly population. If you don't, you can move to the organophosphate for 1 year, pyrethroid for 1 year, and macrocyclic dactone before going up to the top of the rotation again. Insecticide sprays are really, really, really effective for tick control, especially if you can cover the whole animal in the spray. There are several pyrethroid options. We're more limited when it comes to the organophosphates. If using in combination with an ear tag, you want to stay in the same group, right? You don't want to put a macrocyclic lactone ear tag in and then spray with a pyrethroid. It just gives the insects exposure to 2 insecticides and just accelerates the rate at which we're getting resistance. Pour arms are very, very favored by producers because they're super easy, right? You can deworm and you can pour for flies at the same time if you're using a macrocyclic lactone. A macrocyclic lactone will work for tick control because how it works is it's absorbed into the body of the animal and distributed through the blood. Although I only say use it if you have super, super high infestations. We want to preserve our macrocyclic lactones as much as possible. And they're actually very, very damaging to our dung beetles, which we'll chat about next. If a producer is going to use a pour-on, I always suggest that you get a good weight and pour along the whole back of the animal. If we underdose our animals, we will be basically giving a sublethal dose of the insecticide. And so we really want to avoid that at all costs. A pour-on pyrethroid is going to be very effective against horn flies. Don't use a pyrethroid pour-on for high tick infestations because it will actually only protect the top line of the animal. A pyrethroid doesn't spread well enough throughout the coat that it's going to kill Asian longhorn ticks that are at a high infestation. And I really urge producers to think of the long game when we talk about our macrocyclic lactones. They are fat soluble, which means that they have a really long excretion time. So if you give it an oral dose, it's over a month. If you give it an injectable, it's a 5-month excretion time. And so this is a problem because what it will do is it will kill any adult or larval dung beetles that you have, especially when we think about sort of our injectables. If you're contaminating every single manure pad for that entire grazing period, your dung beetles are just going to be decimated. They have a really slow reproduction time. So when we're giving them these very, very toxic chemicals, you'll just annihilate your population. And insecticide resistance is only going to get worse in flies. Even if we get new products on the market, chances are that the fly is already going to have some level of cross resistance. So we really need to be prioritizing our non-insecticidal control options. And dung beetles are great because what they do is they bury the manure, which is the breeding site for a lot of our flies that we have concerns with. We also really are concerned about injectable macrocyclic lactones because of nematode and hornfly resistance. We've had some people reach out to us who have said that they used long range for a couple of years after they got an Asian longhorn tick infestation, and now all their worms are resistant to ivermectins. So we really want to be careful with that. The other thing to keep in mind is once you have injected a product into an animal, you cannot pull it back out. And so that long excretion time for an injectable ivermectin, when we did a study here, we only got reduced fly numbers for about 100 days with the injectable, which is the same amount of coverage we got from an ear tag. Now, what's really concerning is that for the rest of that grazing period, those flies are feeding on sublethal doses of ivermectin, which is just going to accelerate the rate of resistance. And we will lose more money to flies than we will ever lose to ticks and Asian and Thaliara orientalis. So we really need to be thinking about the long game in terms of what we're doing. And the good news is immunity to ticks does build over time. So on the left, we have ticks that were fed on an animal that had never seen ticks before. And you see all those ticks are nice and fat and dark. And on the right, you see ticks that we collected off an animal that had only been previously infested once. And you can see that these ticks are not as, some of them are clear or reddish, and those ticks go on to die. Even those ticks that are dark are in many cases smaller. So sometimes we just have to let nature take its course. In a lot of places that had really bad infestations, when we kind of look back 2 or 3 years later, their tick burdens aren't necessarily higher than they were prior to the Asian longhorn tick infestation. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of time. And I also want to point out that, you know, we worry about ticks because of the fact that they transmit pretty nasty pathogens. The 2 tick-borne diseases that we care about most in the United States in terms of our cattle are anaplasmosis and theileriosis. These pathogens have a plan B, right? So we do have biological tick vectors for anaplasmosis. It's dermacented ticks, where depending where you are in the United States, you might have Andersoni, dermacented ticks present year-round. For theileriosis, the only competent vector in the United States is the Asian longhorn tick, which is present over summer. Now, we have evidence that biting flies can transmit anaplasmosis, needles, and also vertical transmission, so from a dam to her calf. And we also have pretty strong evidence that lice can also transmit it. We were just dealing with a situation here in Arkansas where we had cattle positive for anaplasmosis in the dead of winter, and we asked, you know, do you have a lice problem by any chance right now? And he said he's had the worst lice outbreak that he's had for a long time, right? So for theileriosis, lice we know are competent vectors. Needles we know, which will occur all year. We also get vertical transmission from the dam to the calf. And then research that's just come out of my lab that we're really excited about is that we detected Theileria orientalis in the mouth parts of stable flies. And we've done this at 2 separate locations, and we've confirmed that it is Theileria orientalis. We've sequenced it. And interestingly, at these locations, at least one of these locations, we were able to track a herd over time, and we've got within herd transmission without the presence of the tick vector. So we do think that biting flies are able to transmit theileriosis. And so even if we're controlling our ticks, we need to be controlling all our other ectoparasites to make sure that we are minimizing our outbreaks. And so especially now that we have concerns about theileriosis coming in, I really do urge that producers, if they have the resources, test their herd, because the sooner a herd can become endemically stable, and by that we mean that everybody is exposed when they're young, they grow up, we have all the animals are infected, but we have a really low level of disease, it's just going to be beneficial all around. I mean, theileriosis is not going anywhere. It's going to become as established as anaplasma is, but potentially even more so. And so really knowing whether your herd is infected is the most important thing. So you want to, there's no magic number, but if you have a smaller herd, I always recommend test as many animals as possible. If you're in a larger herd, test a representative sample, which is probably between 10 and 20%. This is going to catch it early on before, if you've sort of at the early stage of introduction. Important to know, once an animal is positive, it will remain infected for life. What you want to do is you want to draw a purple top tube, and most states have their own regional labs that will test it for you. And then test any new animals coming into the herd. If you're a positive herd and then you've got a negative animal coming in, you want to be able to watch this animal and make sure that it integrates into the herd without any issues, which is very, very possible to do. Likewise, if you are a negative herd, keeping theileriosis out forever is just not an issue, not an option we have, right? It's going to eventually be very, very hard to keep it out, especially if flies are transmitting it. If your neighbor has it, it can come to you. So really making sure that you know your herd status and test. If you do have a positive animal that's coming into your herd, that's not necessarily a problem. We just want to keep an eye on everybody and make sure that integration goes as safely as possible. And also important to note that co-infection with anaplasmosis is a real thing. We've been testing some herds, and You know, the one herd that we looked at was 80% positive for anaplasmosis, 60% positive for theileriosis. We had 50% of those animals were co-infected. And honestly, we had a very, 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 very small portion of animals that had neither infection. And to be honest, for some of those, it could just be that their infection level is so low that we didn't pick it up on the test. And so here is my contact information. Feel free